By the time Lin Wei saw the blood on the sheriff's cuff, the shirt was already half-boiled in a copper vat, and the whole back room smelled of lye, wet wool, and the bitter river mud that clung to men who had ridden too hard after rain. In the front room, his niece, May, was promising a rancher that his Sunday collar would be ready by dawn, as if Mercy Crossing were still an ordinary town and not a place where one torn seam could get a man killed. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We always like to know who's with us when the lantern is lit and a story begins. Lin lifted the sheriff's white shirt from the steam with 2 ash sticks and held it up to the lamp. Good cotton, store-bought, 1 cuff frayed, 1 elbow patched by a patient hand, and at the left breast, where a pocket should have sat neat and square, the cloth had been cut away, so cleanly and careless I might think it had never been there at all. But Lin had made his living studying what men forgot in their clothes. A missing pocket always left a ghost behind, tiny needle holes and a faint square in the weave. This shirt had carried a pocket for years. Somebody had removed it in a hurry, after it had been worn, after whatever once rested over Sheriff Everett Boone's heart had become too dangerous to keep. Lin said nothing. He laid the shirt flat, pressed 2 fingers to the empty space, and felt stiffness in the fabric. Not starch. Dried blood. In the seam where the pocket had been cut loose, something pale was caught in the thread. He teased it free with a bone needle and unfolded it 1 careful breath at a time. Most of the ink had run. 3 things remained. Rose Hale. Midnight. Bring the child alone. From the front room came Boone's voice, rich and easy and already smiling at somebody else's discomfort. Tell your uncle not to scorch that broadcloth. Cost me more than the horse that carried it. May gave the polite little laugh she used for dangerous men. Lin folded the scrap once and slid it inside his sleeve. When he carried the shirts forward, Boone was leaning against the counter with both thumbs hooked in his belt. Everett Boone had the kind of face that only turned ugly after a man studied it. Square jaw, pale eyes, clean cheeks, and a mouth forever on the edge of enjoying what it could take. You found my cufflink last week, Boone said. Reckon I ought to trust you with the mayor's best suit next. Lin set the bundle down. Boone watched him too closely. Something wrong with the shirt? Lin shook his head. Ready tomorrow. See that it is. Boone slid 2 coins across the counter, then glanced toward the hall that led to the rear rooms. You still taking in Miss Hale's wash? The question chilled the air. Lin kept his face still. Whoever pays, I wash. Boone smiled. That's a wise way to live. He took his hat and left. The bell slammed hard enough to make May flinch. She waited until the hoofbeats faded. Uncle, why did he ask about Mrs. Hale? Lin did not answer at once. Rose Hale lived in a peeling blue house at the edge of town with 1 apricot tree and 1 6-year-old son. Her husband had been crushed in the mine 2 winters earlier. Since then she took in mending, spoke softly, and kept a watchfulness in her eyes that belonged to people who had learned the world was seldom finished hurting them. 3 days ago she had not brought her laundry. Yesterday the town began saying she had gone to visit kin in Laramie. That afternoon Lin had seen her son Jonah sitting alone behind the schoolhouse steps, coat open in the cold, saying nothing to anyone. Now there was blood on Boone's cuff and Rose Hale's name in the sheriff's missing pocket. Lock the door, Lin said. It's not dark. Lock it. May slid the bolt. Lin showed her the scrap under the lamp. Her eyes moved quickly over the blurred ink. Bring the child alone, she whispered. Jonah. Lin turned the shirt collar back toward the light. There, barely visible beneath the dirt, lay a fine brown spray across the inside band. Not the smear of a fist fight. Not a nosebleed. Tiny flecks. Close gunshot range. May saw his face change. If he hurt her. If he hurt her, Lin said softly. He will not stop with her. He had come to Mercy Crossing 12 years earlier with 1 trunk and 1 steam iron. The town had not wanted him then and wanted him less after the railroad crews moved on. But white shirts still dirted, and men who spat near his boots still wanted clean collars for church. So he stayed. Laundry taught him the secret anatomy of a town. Clay told him who had been by the river. Missing things told the deepest truths of all. That evening he delivered bundles as usual, because routine kept a man invisible. On his last stop, he passed the jail. Boone stood in the doorway with Deputy Weller, laughing low. Weller did not laugh back. When Lin returned, Jonah Hale was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of untouched soup in front of him. Lin stopped. May rose at once. He was at the pump after dark. Alone. Jonah held a tin soldier with one arm missing. His face was dirty with tears he had run out of strength to wipe away. Lin crouched until they were level. Did your mother send you here? The boy shook his head. Did someone bring you? Another shake. Then, in a voice worn flat by fright, he said, I heard her scream. Lin kept his tone steady. When, at night, Sheriff was there. Jonah swallowed. Ma told me stay under the bed till I heard the back door. But I heard the shot first. May closed her eyes for one heartbeat. Lin asked, Did the sheriff see you? No. I stayed till morning. Then he came back. He looked in the flour bin and the shed and under Ma's mattress. Jonah's fingers tightened around the broken soldier. He kept saying, Where's the pocket? Lin felt the skin between his shoulders turn cold. What pocket? From his shirt. Ma cut it off before. She said if anything happened to her, I was to take it to Mr. Lin because you notice what other folks miss. May made a small sound then, half grief, half rage. Lin rose and went to the window. Mercy Crossing lay under thin moonlight. Beyond it stretched the Wyoming dark. Behind him May asked, What do we do? He could take the child and flee south before dawn and maybe survive. Or he could stay. Lin had spent years learning when silence was shelter. But there came a point when silence became surrender. He looked at Jonah, whose boots did not yet reach the floor. He looked at May, 16 years old, and watching him with the expression children wear when they are learning what sort of world they live in from the adults who answer danger. The hard thing, he said. He sent May and Jonah out the back to Mrs. Alvarez, the baker, a widow who feared God enough to dislike liars more than foreigners. Then Lin carried the sheriff's shirt to the one man in town who hated Boone openly enough to be useful. Dr. Ezra Bell kept his office above the apothecary and answered the knock in shirt sleeves, spectacles low on his nose. If this is about my collars, I'll pay Friday. Lin unwrapped the shirt and turned the collar toward the lamp. Bell's irritation vanished. He leaned close. Good Lord. Distance? Lin asked. Bell studied the flex. Very near. 3 feet, maybe less, depending on angle. Will you say that under oath? Bell looked up. Come inside. Lin told him what he must. Rose missing, the note in the seam, Jonah hidden. He did not say where. Bell listened without interrupting, then sat heavily in his chair. Everett Boone and Judge Harrow play cards every Thursday, the doctor said. Harrow owes him money. Half this town owes him favors. Even if you took that shirt to court, whose word do you think they'd take over the sheriff's? Yours, Lin said, if you stand. Bell gave a bitter laugh. You think I'm brave because I can set a leg? No, Lin said. I think you are tired. That landed hard. Bell took off his spectacles and rubbed at his eyes. Rose Hale came to me a month ago with a split lip and bruises she said came from falling while carrying wood. I asked if she wanted me to write what I believed. She said not yet. Said she had something on Boone and needed time. What? She never told me. But there've been whispers for years. Prisoners who never reached Cheyenne. Ranch deeds changing hands after convenient deaths. Men run out of town because Boone liked the look of their land. He looked at the shirt again. If the boy saw him, Boone won't leave a witness breathing. Bell poured whiskey into a chipped cup and set it within reach. Tell me plain, he said. What would you have done in her place? Trusted this town? Run? Or wagered your life on one truth surviving till morning? Lin did not touch the cup. I would hide what mattered where a vain man would never think to look twice. Then I would pray the one person who notices seams had not yet gone blind. Near midnight hoofbeats entered the alley. 2 riders. One heavy in the saddle. One reluctant. Lin had already banked the fire, moved the irons, and propped the back window open just enough for a child to slip through if he had to. May stood near the hall with a kitchen knife she was trying not to let shake. Jonah was behind her, white-faced and silent. Lin hid the shirt beneath the false bottom of the starch crate and tied the paper scrap inside his sleeve. Then the pounding came. Lin, Boone called, cheerful as a man arriving for supper. Open up. Lin lifted the latch. Boone entered with Deputy Weller behind him and lantern light pouring around both men. Sorry to call so late. Need my white shirt. Riding out before dawn. Lin handed it over. Boone rubbed the place where the pocket had been cut away. You ever find things in folks' clothes? He asked lightly. Coins. Letters. Secrets. Buttons, Lin said. That all? Lin said nothing. Boone's eyes drifted toward the hallway. You got company? My niece. Only her. There was at last. From the rear room came the smallest scrape of a boot. Boone heard it. His smile vanished. Bring him out. Weller looked sick. Lin did not move. Boone sighed and drew his revolver. I was hoping not to do this in front of the girl. May stepped into view on her own, chin lifted though the knife trembled in her hand. There is no one here but family. Boone looked at her with amused contempt. Then your family won't mind me looking. He started down the hall. Lin moved into his path. For one breath the whole room held still. Then Boone drove the gun barrel into Lin's ribs. Pain flashed white. Lin staggered and straightened. Boone shoved him again. You know what happens when men like you forget your place? Lin tasted blood. Men like me, he said. Bury men like you. Weller looked up sharply. Boone's face hardened. You should have stayed with washing. The gun came up. May threw the flat iron. It struck Boone at the temple with a crack like split wood. His shot tore into the ceiling. Jonah screamed. Weller lunged for Boone's wrist, trying to knock the weapon aside before the sheriff could recover. Boone slammed an elbow into him, spun, and fired again. The bullet shattered the washstand mirror. Glass burst across the floor. Lin drove into Boone's middle with all the force in his body. They hit the counter together. Boone was stronger. Lin's strength simply wore a different shape. Boone hammered the butt of the revolver across Lin's shoulder. Lin's arm went numb. May scrambled for the fallen knife. Weller shouted, Sheriff, stop. Boone kicked Lin backward and leveled the gun toward the hall. Move, girl. Jonah stepped out then, sobbing and clutching his broken soldier. Don't hurt her. Boone's expression softened into something almost tender. There you are. In that one still second Lin saw the whole truth of him. Boone did not look at Jonah as a witness. He looked at him as a loose thread that had to be cut. Weller saw it too. Everett, he said, and his voice broke on the name. He's 6. Boone did not turn. Then he won't suffer long. Weller moved first. He knocked Boone's wrist sideways as the gun fired. The ball buried itself in the doorframe. May slashed with the knife and opened Boone's forearm. He roared, backhanded her, and she crashed into the stove. Lin went cold. He snatched up the long wooden wash pole and swung low. It cracked against Boone's knee. Boone dropped with a curse. Weller grabbed for the revolver again. This time Boone fired point-blank into the deputy's side. Weller folded with a sound Lin would remember all his life. Jonah screamed. Boone, bleeding and half-blind with rage, turned the gun toward the child. Lin hurled the lye bucket. The liquid struck Boone across face and chest. He screamed, raw, animal, unbelieving, and clawed at his eyes. The revolver fired into the floorboards. Steam lifted where lay soaked cloth and skin. Boone staggered into the starch shelves and dragged them down with him in a crashing white storm. Back, Lin shouted. He hauled May upright, pushed Jonah behind the counter, and crossed to Weller. Blood pumped dark through the deputy's fingers. Weller caught Lin's sleeve. The pocket, he gasped. Lin bent close. In my saddlebag, Weller whispered. Rose gave it to me. Said if Boone came before dawn, I was to take it to Judge Fenwick in Casper. I got scared. Told Boone I'd lost it. Shame filled his eyes more than pain. I thought I had time. Boone was on his knees, clawing through broken glass toward the fallen gun. What is it? Lin asked. Ledger page. Names. Payoffs. Deeds. Prisoners never delivered. Weller coughed. And Rose's statement. Signed. She saw Boone kill Ben Sutter over the Harper Ranch line. Everything fit at once. From outside came more hoofbeats. There was no safe choice left. Only necessary ones. Lin took Weller's badge from his vest, threw open the front door, and shouted into the sleeping street with every breath he had. Murder. Sheriff Boone has murdered Rose Hale and shot his deputy. Wake up and come witness. Windows lit along the road one by one. That was the cliff edge, whether truth could survive daylight. Mrs. Alvarez arrived first, hair loose, flowers still on her forearms. Dr. Bell came, buttoning his coat as he ran. Then the blacksmith, 2 miners, a pair of ranch hands, and half the town that had spent years pretending not to notice what Boone was. They stopped in the doorway and took in the scene. No one spoke for a beat. Then Boone tried to gather what remained of his authority. Arrest that Chinaman, he rasped. He attacked an officer. Lin said, ask your deputy who shot him. Weller turned his head with effort. He did, he whispered. Boone shot Rose too. It was barely louder than breath, but the room changed around it. You could feel it the way you feel weather shift. Boone lunged toward the back door. The blacksmith caught him by the collar and drove him to the floor. He cursed, threatened, promised jobs lost, and vengeance carried out. For the first time in his life, fear no longer answered him fast enough. Belle knelt over Weller. "Keep pressure here." Made it without hesitation. Lin looked at her then and saw not the girl he had tried to protect, but the woman fear had failed to break. Mrs. Alvarez laid a hand on Jonah's hair. "We need his mother." "Yes," Lin said. "Before Boone's friends find her first." Boone spat blood. "You'll never prove." Lin held up the scrap from the missing pocket. "Midnight. Bring the child alone." He let the room see Boone's face when he recognized it. He forgot the pocket. She did not. Dr. Bell, still working over Weller, said, "And I will swear to the blood spatter on the sheriff's collar and the bruises Rose Hale tried to hide." Under oath. That was enough. The miners found Rose before dawn in a dry wash past Miller Creek, wrapped in one of her own quilts as if murder could be softened by familiarity. Jonah did not see her there. Lin made certain of it. Boone was locked in the cell he had used to frighten drunks, debtors, and unlucky men for 7 years. This time the keys stayed in Dr. Bell's pocket until the circuit marshal arrived from Casper with 3 armed riders and no patience for local arrangements. The page from Weller's saddlebag came to light at sunrise. It was worse than rumor. Names of ranchers paid to lie. Money delivered to Judge Harrow. Prisoners listed as transferred who had never reached any jail alive. Claims seized after men died convenient deaths. And Rose Hale's signed statement pinned to it with a rusting tack. By noon Harrow had fled. By evening he was taken on the North Road with Boone's money belt in his valise. Mercy Crossing still stood, but changed forever. That night Lin sat on the bakery steps with May while the town moved in whispers around them. His ribs ached when he breathed. Somewhere the blacksmith hammered at the jail lock Boone had bent in panic. May held a cup of tea between both hands. "I was afraid," she said. "So was I." "You did not look afraid." Lin stared into the dark street. Most courage looks exactly like fear that has made up its mind. A little later Jonah came into the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, the broken soldier still in his fist. He stood there for a moment, then asked, "Did my ma know you'd help?" Lin thought of Rose cutting the pocket from Boone's shirt while danger breathed down her neck. He thought of her choosing him not because he was powerful, but because he paid attention. "She knew I noticed what other people throw away." Jonah nodded as if that were the finest thing a man could be. They sat together in the cooling dark. Then the boy asked, "Do I have to go back to the house?" The words were small. The wound inside them was not. May answered first. "No." But Jonah looked at Lin. Children always knew who held the true shape of a thing. Lin had not planned for a child. His wife had died years earlier in Sacramento before they ever reached Wyoming. The baby with her had lived only long enough to be named. Since then Lin had kept his heart tidy, because tidy hearts are easier to carry. But grief does not empty a man. It hollows him so that, someday, something living may fit inside. "You can stay here," he said. Jonah blinked. "With you?" "With us." "For how long?" Lin looked at May. She smiled through the bruise on her cheek. "As long as it takes." Jonah bent over the one-armed soldier so they would not see him cry. Lin pretended not to. "If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for." A like and a subscribe tell us to keep going. And they help stories like this reach the people who need them most. Rose Hale was buried 2 days later on a clear, almost insulting blue morning. Just hard sunlight on dry grass and wind cold enough to sting the eyes. Half the town came, partly for her and partly from the uneasy need to be seen coming. Lin did not judge them for it. Sometimes people walk toward decency for poor reasons and find better ones after arrival. Jonah stood between Lin and May with a bunch of late asters tied in kitchen twine. When the minister finished, the boy laid them on the coffin and whispered something only the wood was meant to hear. Then he turned and pointed straight at Boone, who had been brought under guard to hear the charges read before transport. "You don't get her house," Jonah said, his voice carrying farther than a child's voice should. "You don't get none of it." The circuit marshal unfolded the deed papers recovered from Boone's ledger. "For the record," he said, "Rose Hale's property remains with her lawful heir, Jonah Hale, to be held in trust until he comes of age." That was Boone's true defeat. The small people he had tried to erase were being named and protected. He sagged then. Judge Harrow lost the bench. Boone lost the badge, the stolen ranch parcel, the hidden accounts, and whatever remained of his dignity when the Denver papers printed the case beneath headlines that used the words murder, corruption, and child witness. He was convicted before winter and sent east in chains to serve years long enough to feel like forever to a man who had built his whole life on immediate obedience. Deputy Weller lived. He walked with a stiffness afterward and carried more shame than scar tissue. In spring, he came to the laundry with a paper bag of oranges, rare and dear, and set them on the counter without meeting Lin's eyes. "I should have acted sooner," he said. "Yes," Lin answered. Weller nodded once. He had deserved no softer word. "Thank you for saying it plain." Lin slid one orange back toward him. "Next time, be sooner." Justice did not mend roofs or stack wood, so the town had to learn the practical labor of becoming decent. Rose's house needed repair. Jonah needed boots and books. The laundry roof leaked where Boone's bullet had split the beam. Mrs. Alvarez organized meals. The blacksmith fixed hinges without charge. Two miners who used to cross the street rather than pass Lin on the same boardwalk spent a Sunday laying new shingles over his press room. People rarely become saints all at once. Mercy Crossing elected a new sheriff in March, a widow named Clara Voss who kept accounts in a hand neat enough to shame bankers and wore her late husband's revolver only when the work required it. Men underestimated her briefly, which was all the time she needed. One evening near the end of winter, Lin found May sewing a new shirt pocket onto one of his work shirts. Her stitches were small and exact. "You missed one side," he said. "No," she answered. "I left it open." Inside the pocket lay the old note from Boone's shirt, flattened and wrapped in waxed cloth. "For remembering?" Lin asked. "For warning," she said. Then she looked up. "A pocket is only useless if you trust the wrong man to fill it." Lin laughed softly. It startled them both. Real laughter had been scarce before. By the second summer, Jonah's laughter had returned often enough to sound natural. The apricot tree at Rose's old house bloomed so heavily it looked snowed on in April. May expanded the business to take in dressmaking, and women came from 3 towns over for her fitted sleeves and Sunday collars. Lin still worked the vats each morning, but now there was a school slate by the counter where Jonah practiced sums between customers and drew sheriff stars with 5 crooked points. Years later, people told the story wrong. They made Lin larger and fiercer than he was. But the people who had been there remembered better. He was simply the one who had trained himself to see the small torn place where the truth was trying not to vanish. On a warm dusk after closing, the 3 of them sat on the laundry porch while the last heat slid off the planks. From inside came the clean mineral smell of pressed linen and starch. Crickets tuned up along the ditch. Somewhere down the road, Mrs. Alvarez was singing to bread dough in Spanish, low and off-key and full of home. Jonah rested his head against Lin's arm. May sat mending the tin soldier's missing shoulder with wire and patience. The boy's eyes were already heavy with sleep. "Do you think Ma can see us?" he asked. Lin looked toward the apricot leaves stirring across the street. "I think love notices where it is needed," he said. "And once it has found you, it rarely leaves empty-handed." Jonah considered that with great seriousness, then let his eyes close. Before long, he was asleep on the step, warm against Lin's side, while May rested her head on Lin's good shoulder, and the 3 of them listened to the ordinary, miraculous sounds of a town learning, at last, how to live with clean hands beneath a sky the color of faded blue cotton. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a high desert ranch because her own brothers were ashamed to keep her, and the scarred trail boss who understood her silence long before he understood his own heart.